Most people spend their entire lives making decisions, thousands of them, every single day, what to pursue, who to trust, what to believe, what to risk, what to avoid. And they make almost all of those decisions believing they're thinking clearly, believing they're being rational, believing they're seeing the situation as it actually is. They're not. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as the most important thing I can tell you about why your life looks the way it does right now. Your brain is not a neutral processing machine. It's not a camera that captures reality accurately. It's an interpretation machine, a prediction machine, a survival machine, built over millions of years to keep you alive, not to help you think clearly, not to help you make good decisions, not to help you see the world as it actually is, to keep you alive. And those two goals, survival and clarity, are not the same thing. In fact, they're often in direct opposition. And understanding exactly how your brain deceives you and why is one of the most practically valuable things you can do. Because you cannot defend against a bias you don't know exists. You cannot correct for a distortion you can't see. And right now, your brain is running distortions you've never been told about, that are shaping every significant decision in your life. Stay with me, because this changes everything. Let me start with the most pervasive deception, the one that affects more decisions than almost any other. Your brain is not recording your experiences, it's constructing them. There's a fundamental difference between those two things. Recording would mean capturing what actually happened, storing it accurately, retrieving it faithfully when you need it. That's not what your brain does. What your brain actually does is take incomplete sensory information, fill in the gaps with predictions based on past experience, and present you with a finished picture that feels like reality, but is actually partly constructed, partly invented, partly your brain telling you what it expects to see rather than what's actually there. This happens at the perceptual level. Your eyes capture about 10 megapixels of information per second, but your brain processes about 10 billion bits of information per second. The difference between those two numbers is your brain filling in gaps, making predictions, completing the picture, and doing it so seamlessly, so automatically, that you experience the completed picture as raw reality. You don't experience the construction, you experience the result. And you assume the result is accurate. It often isn't. And this has enormous implications, because if your brain is constructing your perceptions, it's also constructing your memories, your interpretations of other people's behavior, your understanding of situations, your reading of opportunities and risks. All of it is going through this constructive process. All of it is being shaped by what your brain expects, by what your past experiences have taught it to predict, by what your current emotional state is priming it to see. And none of it is being presented to you as constructed. It's all being presented as simply what's there, what's real, what's true. And that gap between what's actually happening and what your brain tells you is happening is where most of the bad decisions in your life live. Here's the second deception, and this one has probably cost you more than you realize. Your brain systematically overweights losses relative to gains. This is not a character flaw, it's not weakness, it's a feature, built in over millions of years of evolution, because in the environment your brain was designed for, missing a gain was unfortunate, suffering a loss was potentially fatal, missing the berries meant you were hungry for a day, missing the predator meant you were dead. So your brain learned to pay vastly more attention to potential losses than to potential gains, to feel losses roughly twice as intensely as equivalent gains, to weigh the pain of losing something more heavily than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. And that calibration made perfect sense in the ancestral environment. It kept people alive. But we are not in the ancestral environment anymore. Most of the decisions we make today are not survival decisions. They're opportunity decisions, career decisions, relationship decisions, investment decisions, creative decisions. And in those domains, the brain's loss aversion calibration is not just unhelpful, it's actively destructive. Because it makes you systematically undervalue opportunities, systematically overestimate risks, systematically choose the safe option even when the safe option is the worse option. Think about the decisions this has already affected in your life. The opportunity you didn't pursue because the downside felt too large. The conversation you didn't have because the potential awkwardness felt too risky. The thing you didn't start because the possibility of failure felt heavier than the possibility of success. All of those decisions were made by a brain that was weighing the loss twice as heavily as the gain. Not because the loss was actually twice as bad, but because your brain is calibrated that way. And the cost of that miscalibration over a lifetime of decisions is enormous. The people who build extraordinary things are not people who feel less fear. They feel the same fear, the same pull toward safety, the same overweighted sense of potential loss. But they've learned to recognize it as a calibration error, as a signal that needs to be corrected for, rather than a signal that needs to be obeyed. And that recognition, that ability to see the loss aversion for what it is, changes how they respond to it. Let me talk about confirmation bias, because this is the one that operates most invisibly, most destructively, most persistently. Your brain is not looking for truth. It's looking for confirmation. Once you believe something, your brain becomes an evidence collection machine for that belief. It notices information that supports what you already think. It ignores or discounts information that challenges it. It interprets ambiguous information in ways that fit the existing belief. And it does all of this automatically, unconsciously, without flagging to you that it's happening. So you experience it as simply seeing the evidence, when what you're actually doing is selectively perceiving the evidence through a filter constructed by your existing beliefs. Think about what this means in practice. If you believe you're not the kind of person who builds successful businesses, your brain will notice every piece of evidence that confirms that belief. Every failure, every rejection, every moment of struggle, and it will discount or explain away every piece of evidence that challenges it. Every small success, every positive signal, every indication that you're more capable than you currently believe. If you believe a particular person is untrustworthy, you will interpret their behavior through that lens. Ambiguous actions will be read as confirming your suspicion. Evidence to the contrary will be discounted as an exception, and your belief will feel more confirmed every day, even if the underlying reality hasn't changed at all. This is why smart people can be spectacularly wrong for long periods of time, not because they lack intelligence, but because their intelligence is being deployed in service of confirming existing beliefs. Rather than honestly evaluating evidence, the defense against confirmation bias is not intelligence, it's a specific practice. The practice of actively looking for evidence that challenges what you currently believe, specifically seeking out the strongest argument against your current position, asking what would I have to see to change my mind, and then genuinely looking for it. Not as an exercise, as a real practice, because the belief you're most confident about is often the one most worth questioning. Here's one that most people have heard of, but few people understand how deeply it actually operates, the stories your brain tells you about yourself. Your brain is a narrative machine. It doesn't just record events. It constructs stories about events. And specifically, it constructs a story about you. About who you are, about why you do what you do, about what your experiences mean, about what kind of person you are and what you're capable of. And that story, once established, becomes extraordinarily resistant to revision, because your identity is built on it, and your brain treats challenges to your identity as threats to your survival, literally. The same neural systems that activate when you're physically threatened activate when your self-concept is challenged, which means your brain is willing to distort reality significantly to protect the story you tell about yourself. It will selectively remember experiences that fit the story, selectively forget ones that don't, interpret new experiences through the lens of the story, and actively resist information that would require the story to change. And this has a very specific practical consequence. The story you tell about yourself right now is limiting what you're able to see as possible for yourself. If the story includes, I'm not a creative person, your brain will consistently fail to notice the evidence of your creativity. If the story includes, I'm not good with money, your brain will consistently interpret your financial experiences in ways that confirm that. If the story includes, I'm someone who almost makes it but never quite gets there, your brain will find ways to make that pattern persist, because the pattern confirms the story. And the story feels like identity, and identity feels like survival. This is why real change is so hard, not because the behavior is hard to change, because the story that produces the behavior is protected by survival-level mechanisms. And changing the story requires something most people find genuinely uncomfortable. Looking honestly at the narrative you've constructed about yourself, identifying where it's limiting rather than describing, and being willing to revise it, based on evidence rather than protection. Let me talk about one more deception, the one that affects how we see other people, and therefore how we navigate almost everything social and professional. Your brain automatically and unconsciously projects your internal states onto the world. When you're anxious, you see the world as more threatening. When you're confident, you see opportunities that were invisible before. When you're angry, you interpret neutral behavior as hostile. When you're in a good mood, you see people as more trustworthy, more capable, more aligned with you. And you experience all of this as simply seeing clearly, as perceiving what's actually there, when what you're actually doing is projecting, running your internal emotional state through your perception of external reality, and then experiencing the result as objective observation. This matters enormously for decisions, because if you're making an important assessment of a person or situation while in a particular emotional state, that emotional state is shaping what you see, what you notice, what you emphasize, what you discount. And you have no automatic awareness that this is happening. The solution is not to try to become emotionless before making decisions. That's not possible. And it wouldn't be desirable, even if it were. The solution is to develop the habit of asking yourself before important assessments, what emotional state am I currently in? And how might that state be shaping what I'm seeing right now? Not to override the emotion, but to correct for it. To apply a conscious calibration to what your emotional state might be distorting, that habit alone, practiced consistently, will improve the quality of your decisions more than almost anything else I can tell you. So here's what all of this means practically. Your brain is constructing reality rather than recording it. Your brain is overweighting loss relative to gain. Your brain is collecting confirmation for existing beliefs rather than honestly evaluating evidence. Your brain is protecting a story about yourself that may be limiting what you can see as possible. And your brain is projecting your emotional states onto your perception of other people and situations. All of this is happening automatically, continuously, invisibly, and shaping every significant decision in your life. You cannot eliminate these biases. They are structural features of how the human brain works. But you can learn to recognize them. You can develop the habit of asking which of these distortions might be operating right now. You can create distance between the automatic interpretation and the decision you make based on it. You can build in practices that correct for the most common errors. Actively seeking disconfirming evidence. Asking what the actual worst case is before letting loss aversion drive you. Checking your emotional state before making important assessments of people. Questioning the story you tell about yourself with the same rigor you'd apply to any other claim. None of this is about becoming a cold calculating machine. It's about becoming a more accurate observer of reality, of yourself, of other people, of situations. Because accuracy, in a world where most people are operating on constructed reality, is one of the most powerful advantages you can have. Your brain is lying to you. It has been your whole life. Not maliciously, but persistently. And the first step to thinking more clearly is knowing exactly how it does it. Now you know. The question is what you do with that knowledge. Starting with the next decision you make.